Howdy there. I'm Matt McKinley, and we're burning daylight.
Well, howdy there, daylight burners. Happy Friday. It's actually Wednesday evening for me, but you'll be hearing this Friday. And how the hell are you? It's been a minute. First official podcast of 2020. And man, I got to tell you, 2020 started with a bang. Got a lot of stuff to talk about today. It's one event in particular, but I think you all know what that's about. Donald Trump gave the order to deliver a drone strike on General Qasem Soleimani, basically the head military guy in Iraq or Iran. Arguably the most powerful man in the Middle East, and took him out along with a top Iranian Shia militia leader, very closely aligned. They were in the same vehicle. The guy was in town. Soleimani was in town from kind of a Middle East tour, in which he was allegedly. I say that because I don't know. This is what we're being told. But as you know, I don't typically trust the official narrative. But guy was in town for a funeral, but he had been kind of bebopping around the Middle East, Lebanon, Syria, wherever else, and coordinating with these Shia militia and I guess terrorist groups, you could call them that. Hezbollah being the big one throughout the region. So anyway, he was in town. Intelligence told us that he was in town, and they presented Trump with several options. I think I've heard reports of 4. I don't know. I don't know exactly how many options. But he decided to go ahead and take him out. So using a Reaper drone, and I don't know what the name of the missile was, but they took out the vehicle that he was in, leaving the Baghdad International Airport. And as you can imagine, we've got a lot to talk about. So before we excuse me, before we get too much into it, I better tell you about my sponsor, and that's Loma Livestock. And George Raftopoulos down there in Loma, Colorado, or over there in Loma, Colorado. They're located at 1369 12.5 Road. You can get a hold of them at 970-858-9988, or you can check them out online at lomalivestock.com. They are NHTC certified sale barn, non-hormone treated cattle, so there'll be no implanted cattle there. And they got a sale going every Wednesday, starting at 9 o'clock with the cows and singles, followed by the feeders at 11. Check them out on their website. You can get a market recap and check out their schedule of events, sales schedule. They've got several production sales that they run through Diamond Peak Cattle, as well as some other local producers for the special sales. But check it out and give them a call. Tell them Burning Daylight Podcast sent you. So thanks, George and Loma Livestock. And let's get on into this deal because there's a lot there. So first things first, this Soleimani guy, pretty bad dude. No doubt about it. I want to get that out there right off the bat. I feel no sympathy, no sorrow. No, I wouldn't have anything to have remorse for. But Nothing of the sort towards this dude. He was a pretty evil sumbitch, and pretty power hungry, and pretty good at what he did, and that was maintaining power and using fear and terrorism to advance his political goals. But also being said, this wasn't just some terrorist leader. So I know there's a lot of you that are very pro-military, very pro-troops, and very pro-Trump. No, there's some of you that are not so much, and then myself, I try to call it as I see it, and I'm pretty torn on this one, in particular, because while I have no issue with the dude being dead, I think he deserved to die, probably needed to die, but there's a lot of other things at play. So I guess first things first is he is a Iranian military official, and although we have been fighting Iranian proxies and Iranian backed, I guess if you don't know what proxy is, I'll be saying it quite a bit, but basically the Iranian government is funneling money and weapons and training to these different militia, sometimes radical militias. More often than not, they're just kind of what they would consider freedom fighters, and not to try and take their side. I'm not. I really I don't care one way or another about the people of Iraq or Iran. I'm not trying to sound callous. I just don't want to be over there. I don't think we need to. So I'm just going to try to explain these folks and from a different point of view, rather than just viewing them as simply as terrorist groups. It's a lot more complicated than that, and I think we've all seen that over the past almost 20 years that we've been involved in these countries. So when we invaded Iraq back in 2003, I can remember driving back from Garden City, Kansas, in my little shitbox GMC pickup, and they started with Operation Shock and Awe and bombed the ever living shit out of Iraq. Rolled in, guns blazing, took Baghdad pretty quickly, overthrew Saddam, and then we declared victory. And then there's several podcasts that I've listened to over the last couple of days, and I've listened to at least parts of a couple different books on the subject or pertaining to the subject, or at least where they're covered a little bit of this whole situation. And basically, you are looking, I'm going to try to put it in American terms because that's what we understand. So all these countries, they're a lot like the U.S. In that there are different factions of people everywhere. You talk to your average Joe from, say Thaddeus down in Alabama. He's going to have a similar values, but also be completely different than somebody in Minnesota or even better, like New York City or LA, and even people within, with like-minded ideologies from LA and New York. They're going to have some big differences in how they view things, much as the same in any of these other countries. However, Uh, in the U.S., we typically identify as American first, then wherever you're from. You know, they'll ask you where you're from, and yeah, if it's somebody from anywhere else in the world, they'll know you're from the U.S. But they may not know anything about. They just kind of lump you up into one category, like we do with the Iraqis and the Iranians, and for a lot of us, just Muslims in general. Now, there are two major factions of Islam, and to be 100% honest with you, I don't know what the religious theologies where they differ between Shia and Sunni. I don't know. I don't really care. I know that they don't like each other any more than they like us. But when it comes to a war and an invasion like we have over there, they're damn sure going to team up against us because they at least know each other. So when we invaded Iraq back in 2003, Saddam Hussein was in power. Now, from a religious standpoint, he was a moderate Sunni Muslim. From a individual standpoint, he was brutal, vile individual, much like most dictators around the world. And listening to some veterans, and especially like special forces type people, and that later went on to do some contracting for the CIA and other private military groups, basically mercenaries. I don't want to put anyone down, but that's just if you look at it for what it is, that's what they are. When you go to contract for the CIA or any of these other paramilitary organizations, or say like Blackwater, you're basically a mercenary. And so what the U.S. government kind of outsources a lot of these operations to these private contracting groups, and that way they can say they're reducing troops, but at the same time they're not really reducing troop levels. They're just passing it off to the private sector. But that's a whole different deal as well. But talking to, or not talking to, but listening for a pretty extended period of time to some of these people that have been over there, the way they view and value life is completely different than us. But at the same time, they have that kind of, I don't know if you'd call it nationalistic viewpoint, but more than anything, they just, they want to live their lives in their country without being interfered with by any outside power, but in particular the U.S., because we're the ones that's there. So we overthrew Saddam, a rather moderate, from a religious standpoint, Sunni Muslim. Iraq in and of itself is about 80% Shia population, and and Saddam Hussein ruled with an iron fist. I mean, he was, like I said, he was a brutal, brutal dictator, but he kind of kept everybody in line, but that was because he was not scared to just slaughter, whether it be the Kurds or his, Shia, detractors or whatever, his opponents, political opponents, didn't matter. If you read back through history, all these dictators that had just absolute power like that were just paranoid as hell, and so that's pretty common. But he was able to basically maintain control over that country because of it. I'm gonna go on a different episode, go back through the history, kind of detailing how we got over in the Middle East, and why we're there, and like why it gets so ugly. And it's a different thing. So anyway, we overthrew Saddam, and basically there was nobody ready to step in and lead, and especially because a lot of Saddam's allies, whether they truly believed in um, the Ba'ath Party, which is what Saddam was the Ba'ath Party leader, whether they truly believed in that, or whether they were just there because they happened to be good at what they did and they didn't want to go against Saddam because they are afraid they're going to get killed. Very valid fear. Um, they those people were still there, but the government chose not to do anything with them. They pretty well purged the entire government of Saddam loyalists and turned it over to the Sunni majority, and that is kind of where we're at now, where Iran comes into play. Now we've been pretty hostile with Iran since 1953, in which when we overthrew the only democratically elected leader that Iran has ever had, Mohammad Mossadegh. Now, he came to power after World War II, and the British Empire was kind of, I guess, being liberated, where these colonies were kind of just given their independence. So a lot of different countries now that were under former British rule. So like Iran, I'm not sure about Iraq, but India, Pakistan those are two big ones, but Iran was right there in that. So they win their independence after World War II. Before that, they kind of had a series of shahs, or kings, I guess, that were kind of just a bunch of playboys that had a lot of wealth, but they borrowed a ton of money. They lived very lavish lifestyles, and this one shah in particular had over like 1,000 wives, and every member of, I don't know how many children he fathered, but every one of those kids had full access to the country's treasury, basically. And so they were constantly in debt, constantly borrowing money. But they had a lot of oil, and the British owned basically all the mineral rights and the oil operations there in Iran. And the Shah just took a share of the profits. So when Mossadegh came in, he nationalized the oil industry in Iran, and obviously that pissed off the British, because that was the company in particular that they nationalized was the most profitable company in the entire British Empire. And there's the old saying, like, the sun never sleeps, or sun never sets on the British Empire. They were all over the world, but this was that one oil company in particular was their most profitable company. And of course, there was a lot of U.S. Petroleum interest over there, and consequently a lot of CIA interest. There's a lot of oilmen that were working very closely with the CIA overseas, because they had good cover, being that there was a lot of like offshore drilling, and just a lot of multinational companies involved. So there was a lot of spy games being played within the oil industry. You can look into the Bush family and see that, but that's story for another day. So this guy comes to power. He nationalizes the petroleum industry, and that pisses off a bunch of Americans, including the CIA, and they ended up overthrowing him. And they installed the Shah, and they also trained and installed a secret police force that was incredibly brutal. Did everything imaginable to keep this Shah in power. He was eventually overthrown in, I think, like 78 or 79 during what's known as the Islamic Revolution, in which the current leader come to power, the Ayatollah Khamenei. And along with that was this General Qasem Soleimani. And from what I understand about this guy is not only was he a bad dude, he was kind of a badass. He really was. I mean, if we're going to be pretty honest about it, he joined the military when he was like in his 20s, like early 20s during this Islamic Revolution, and did very well. But what he ended up doing was he went back to his hometown and assembled a group. I don't know if the military terms, whether it was a regiment or corps or whatever, but he had a group of his kind of his buddies that he trained in his own way, and they were particularly good at fighting, I guess, and won a whole bunch of battles. And by the time he was, he wasn't even 30, and he had like 6,000 dudes under his control. He was kind of a badass. And he got a reputation throughout the Middle East, and it was kind of almost like a cult figure, something along the lines of, like a Stonewall Jackson, or just one of those generals that throughout American, like the Swamp Fox in the American Revolution, like did a lot of kind of like guerrilla type warfare, but won a lot of big victories, and he was kind of larger than life. So he became the head of the Iranian Republican National Guard, which is like their elite military force, and in particular the Quds Force, which was like their kind of like, they modeled it after the U.S. Special Forces. So whether that be, the Force Recon Marines or the Green Berets or the Navy SEALs, Delta Force, something like that. It was right along those lines is kind of how they modeled it. And he was the leader of that. And listening to a lot of people talk, military and otherwise, these supreme leaders really don't have much power. It's whoever controls the military controls the country. And this guy very much controlled the military. And he was also very well connected within the Middle East and organized a lot of terrorist activities. And it's been rumored, I won't say that they have been funded by Iran. Most likely have. I have not seen any particular proof that says so, but it's kind of a given fact. They've been funding these different militias and what we would designate as terrorist groups throughout the Middle East. So by taking him out, it puts Iran in a bad way. Like they're pretty well, their number one power dude is gone. One of the biggest kind of warlords in Iraq is now gone, and he was kind of known as like the behind the scenes prime minister. While I don't think he held any official office. He basically controlled what happened in parliament, and he was the leader of one of these militias, one of the bigger ones in Iran or Iraq. And so now we have the Iraqi parliament voting to expel not just U.S., but coalition troops, mostly U.S., out of Iraq completely. And from what I understand, we're basically saying no, or Trump Trump told them we'd leave, but they have to pay for the military bases and the embassy there in Iraq, which they don't have the money to do. So basically, we're not leaving. Where this shit gets real dicey is there's a lot of players at stake here. So Iran has a lot of oil, and they also control the Straits of Hormuz, which I'm going to look up a little stat here for you. But the Straits of Hormuz is like the main waterway for oil transport in the world because there's so much oil coming out of the Middle East, and the Straits of Hormuz are close enough to like the Suez Canal and the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean that it's an ideal place to ship all that oil throughout the rest of the world. All right, so I've got a article here from EIA.gov, and that would be the Energy Administration, Energy Information Administration. So it's a government agency, and it says Strait of Hormuz, located between Oman and Iran, connects the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important oil choke point because of the large volumes of oil that flow through the strait. In 2018, its daily oil flow averaged 21 million barrels per day, or the equivalent of about 21% of global petroleum liquids consumption. So I read another little snippet from a different, I think it was just from the Google search, like the top deal from Google itself. And so about 35% of all the oil that is shipped in boats and, on the ocean, about 35% of it goes through the Straits of Hormuz, and about 20% of the world's total oil supply goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So Iran controls most of that. On the northern border, you have Russia. On the western border of Iran, you have Iraq. And then China plays a big part of this because they get a lot of oil from there, and they've got a lot of money invested in Iran. Same with Russia. Russia has always had interest in Iran, going back to World War II. That was one of the big line in the sands for Stalin when we were breaking up the Axis powers, was that Iran was pretty well off limits because Russia got a ton of oil from there. So Iran's always been a hot spot. But after that 79 Islamic Revolution, which we were involved in, came the, well, I don't know. I guess I don't know if we were involved in that, but then came the Iran-Iraq War in the 80s, which we were involved in. We supported Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, guy that we also removed later, but kind of a typical story of American foreign policy post World War II. Back somebody and then they piss us off and we take them out. That's kind of what we do. But we backed Saddam Hussein, but at the same time, we were also selling weapons to the Iranians. So kind of playing both sides. And yeah, it actually did happen. It was a big scandal in Reagan's administration. During that Iranian Revolution, when the Ayatollah took over, he basically said no more to the U.S., and that is when the hostage situation happened under Carter. They were released under Reagan, and then there was a bombing of barracks in, I think it was Lebanon, Beirut, I believe, is where that happened. That killed like 200 and some U.S. Marines, and that was kind of the official start of like all the Middle Eastern terrorism, was that Lebanon bombing, which Iran was responsible for that. But I guess long story short is we've got a long history with Iran, and so this isn't just an overnight deal. Since Trump has took office, he's always kind of had a thorn in his side for Iran. He didn't particularly like him, and still doesn't, obviously. But there's been several times where like some events happen, tensions escalate, and there's a lot of tough talk on both sides, and then kind of Iran gets away with like a slap on the wrist, or nothing really happens, and they just kind of kept building. These militias ended up attacking an Iraqi, it might have been U.S. Military base in Iraq. I'm not sure, but I'll have to look and see if that was a U.S. base or an Iraqi base. But regardless, an American military contractor was killed. In response, we attacked a bunch of their militia sites. They responded by attacking our embassy in Baghdad. They didn't really get into the embassy itself. It was kind of the outer perimeter. The thing is huge. I listened to Ron Paul, and he's not a big fan of this embassy because it's huge. It's said it's the size of the Vatican, and it's just kind of a symbol that the U.S. isn't going there. It's the biggest U.S. embassy in the world, and it happens to be in the middle of a very hostile war zone, and in the middle of a country that doesn't particularly want us there. Yeah, I'm sure there's factions that do. I don't know the percentages on it, but like overall, I think they just assume we're not there. And so that they attack our embassy, and then Trump orders this drone strike, and the Reaper got him. Always kind of badass, the names. You got Predator drones, you got the Reaper drone. They just sound badass, and there's probably they're probably not fat because they're in the military, but if they weren't in the military, they'd just be like some fat, like weird nerd dude with a neck beard sitting at a computer and just hitting a button, and boom. Possibly the most powerful man in the Middle East is just gone, vaporized. What I'm hearing probably happened is they just like collected his body parts and put it in a bag and sent it back to Iran. Like, yeah, here you go. There's your great military leader. So I guess to sum all that up, it's a lot more complicated than we killed a terrorist leader. There's a lot of things that they kind of raise suspicions here. Number one, like, we're not at war with Iran, and although this guy was designated as a terrorist, and the Quds Force, which he led, was designated a terrorist group, they are both officially aligned with Iran, so they're part of the Iranian government and military. And we are not officially at war with Iran, even though we've been fighting them for a long time. And it's a very real problem constitutionally, because if you believe in the Constitution, the president does not have the power to declare war. He has the power to do whatever it takes to win a war once that war is is declared, but is the duty of Congress to declare war, and that has not happened. They're justifying it under the authorization for the use of military force, the AUMF, for the global war on terror. I'm sure there won't be. Well, I won't say I'm sure, because actually this is a little bit where I'm headed, where this could be very problematic for Trump. So it's not just any terrorist that he killed, and it's not just a leader of a, like, it's a way bigger deal than killing al-Baghdadi, and probably a bigger deal than killing Osama bin Laden, because unlike those two, this guy is directly aligned with a foreign government. So it's very clearly an act of war. You could say they could be pretty easily justified, I think, by, the embassy is U.S. soil. Attacking the embassy is considered an attack of war, or an act of war. However, these were Iraqi groups that attacked. They may have been funded by Iran, but we were not directly attacked by Iran in these attacks. So that's where it gets a little dicey. My thoughts on this drone strike in general is, this is a gangster fucking move. Like, it is a big, like, who got the bigger dick here, and Trump just slapped a hammer down on the table and said no contest. And it was a pretty big power move by this Soleimani guy, just waltzing around the Middle East, and especially into Baghdad, which we have a very, very heavy presence in. And we've got him designated as a terrorist, and he's still just kind of flying into to Baghdad, just just on a lark. And yeah, and it didn't end well for him. So like, just from like a man standpoint, it was a pretty badass move. Kudos on Trump. That takes a set of stones. I mean, it was that part's a big deal. The part that I won't say I don't. I support this guy being dead, 100%. He is directly responsible for arming and training and coordinating these militia groups that have killed a lot of our men, and women too. That being said, we also shouldn't be over there, and we shouldn't be surprised when these attacks happen. The next thing is, there's a lot of hostile foreign powers at play here, Russia and China being the main two, but you've also got Turkey and overall support, international support for doing anything with Iran is pretty much nothing. I think England might have our back, but France has already said they're out. I'm also going to preface this by saying fuck France, just in general. I don't have a whole lot of irrational hatreds, but France is one of them. I hate France. I don't know why. I don't have any good particular reason, but fuck them right in the ear hole. I can't stand them. But they carry a lot of weight in Europe. So if France is already saying no, you can pretty well bet that the rest of Europe is going to follow suit, or most of Europe's going to follow suit. We've got a lot of military bases in like Italy and Greece on the Mediterranean, within short striking distance of the Middle East. So that could play a pretty big problem. We get pretty cocky over here in the U.S. Back-to-back World War champs. But there's is very, very doubtful that we could have won World War II on our own. Like had England fallen and Russia not made a stand where they did, I don't know if we win that fight. We might have fought it to a draw, but we had the island of England to the UK to launch attacks. And then you had the Russians fighting on the Eastern Front, and they estimated they lost. Well, I guess in World War II there was about 200,000 U.S. Troops killed or injured. I believe killed. Russians lost like 11 million is their estimate. Heavy losses. And they did kind of the bulk of weakening Germany on that Eastern Front. If this shit pops off, pretty good chance that we're gonna have to have all the allies that we can and have full support from them, and it looks like that support is not there right now. That's on the extreme end of things. If this was the Franz Ferdinand for World War III, I don't think it is. Long story short, Trump, I don't think likes war. He's had plenty of chances to put the hammer down on Iran, and he's been pretty diplomatic for the most part. He pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, which he really didn't like. I don't know that it was a great deal, but it was better than no deal, I think. And he also put sanctions back on him, which, if we're going to be 100% honest, sanctions they're an act of war. It's a modern day blockade. Used to, you would just starve out a country by not letting any goods in and out on their coast. So you'd have a naval blockade. What we've done with the Iranians is far more severe. Like we have basically blacklisted them from the world economy. Not only can they not sell or export their oil, but every major bank that didn't significantly cut down on their Iranian oil imports also got sanctioned under this new wave of Iran sanctions. So their economy is in shambles. Like they can't afford a war. They don't want a war, and they know they can't beat us in a war. The U.S., on the other hand, also doesn't want a war. We're already bogged down in two quagmires in the region, Iraq and Afghanistan, with no real end in sight there. And Iran's not going to be the walk in the park that a lot of people make it out to be. I was kind of arguing with a guy in the comments the other day, and he said, military planners have a plan to invade Iran, and which would be over in a couple of weeks. Well, that's what they told us about Iraq too. And 16 years later, here we are, still there. 17 years later now, almost 17. Iraq, same thing. Two longest wars in American history that were supposed to be over very quickly. I've talked to a couple veterans that follow the show and listen, and one of them said Iran would be a logistical nightmare. It's the terrain is terrible, but they got a lot of oil, and it actually just came out a couple months ago. They found a new oil reserve. It's got like 50 billion barrels or something like that. A stupid amount of oil. So, and if you think that's just coincidental, you're putting your head in the sand. It's always about oil. Going to go into that, just briefly touch on it today, but I'll go in depth a little bit later on. And this is kind of the reason why libertarians like Ron Paul will make the Federal Reserve one of their big policy platforms is, ending the Federal Reserve. So before 1917, I believe, is when the Fed was created under Woodrow Wilson. So the Federal Reserve is kind of private, kind of government. Like it's privately run, but the heads are appointed by the government, and they control the entire U.S. dollar. And until Nixon in, I believe, 73, every U.S. dollar was worth a certain amount of gold. So the paper money, you could trade it in and get gold. I'm not sure what year exactly they stopped allowing you to exchange it for gold, but until Nixon took us off the gold and silver standard, our currency was backed by precious metals. After that, it becomes a fiat currency, which means it's not really backed by anything. In this case, we made a deal in which all the world's oil would be traded in the U.S. dollar. So when oil is strong, the dollar is strong. Thus, the big reason we are in the Middle East, because there's a lot of oil in the Middle East, and the U.S. dollar maintains its value on oil being traded in the U.S. dollar. So that is the root cause of all this Middle Eastern nonsense, is what is known as the petrodollar. The oil being the dollar being the main currency in which oil is traded. And that is the reason I think we will, barring the end of the Federal Reserve, that was why we will constantly be in the Middle East fighting stupid wars over there. And there's a lot here. So it's just a lot there, and I honestly don't know what to think about this situation. I think it was a gangster move by Trump to take this dude out. I think the dude deserved to die, but I think the consequences could be pretty steep. I guess what I'm gonna finish up on, and I think you should really pay close attention to this, is the whole impeachment. The impeachment kind of took a back burner to this Soleimani thing, and I don't think they're unrelated. And I think what you're going to see is that if Democrats didn't have a legit case for impeachment before, they do now, because Trump took out a major foreign military leader without authorization of Congress. And if you believe in the Constitution and the principles, Obama did this many a times. I'm not excusing any of that, but we all know that the Democrats, consistency means nothing. So of course they're not going to hold Obama to the same standards as Trump. Trump could cure cancer, AIDS, childhood diabetes, and kill Hitler at the same time, and they would still find a way that he was evil for it. But they would have a lot stronger case with this. As I've said before, the Constitution explicitly gives Congress the authorization to declare war, not the executive. So if you're being 100% Constitution, if you believe in the Constitution, you're going to be consistent there. Yeah, he probably should be impeached. I don't want to see it because I don't like the alternatives at all. But if you're being consistent, yeah, he should probably be impeached for it. It was an illegal act of war. However, they justify it. That's a different story. I've heard some cases that make sense if you treat him like a terrorist leader, which he was, but he's a lot more than that. He's in pieces now. There's not much left of him, so he's not a lot more than anything. But this whole this whole thing, he's created a big stir, really stirred up a hornet's nest, and it's going to be interesting. I don't know where we go from here. I truly think that both Iraq and the U.S. they don't, or not Iraq, Iran. They don't want war. Iran, their economy can't withstand it. The U.S., well, ours can't either, but we got a lot better chance at it than Iran. Russia and China, I don't think they want to get into a hot war with us, but they are 100%. I'm kind of paraphrase Evan Hafer. I was listening to him give his thoughts on the Drinking Bros podcast earlier. But yeah, they have no problem just letting us send our boys to die and wasting a ton of money, draining kind of the country's wealth, fighting these wars that there's no end to, unless you go in and like really go to war like we did in World War II, like like the Union did in the Civil War, and just on Sherman's march to the sea, and just total devastation. Unless you go in and do that, you're never going to win these wars, and I don't think we're going to do that. So what you have is just a quasi empire where they're your colonies, kind of, but you don't really lord over them. You try to let them do their own thing, but you don't at the same time. So then they hate you, and they're just continually fighting you. And every time you kill an innocent civilian, you turn that whole family against you, and you create more of these terrorists, as we call them. They're basically just insurgents fighting for their own homeland. And long story short, it's a giant clusterfuck over there, and this didn't make anything less complicated. It was a gangster ass move by Trump. I respect it. I respect the hell out of it. I think he really had good intentions going through it. I will not put to rest that this could be a setup. I talked in my previous episode at length how I don't trust the Republicans, and how the only reason they're not going along with this impeachment, because they want him out of there as well, because they can't control him. But the only reason they haven't gone along with it is because he's popular among the Republican faithful. So don't be surprised if you see some talk about Republicans caving on this because of their strict adherence to the Constitution, or whatever, that they've ignored up to this point. But if this gives them an excuse to get Trump out of there, who they don't like, don't be surprised if they jump on it. And there's a lot of similarities to the Nixon impeachment hearings, and while Nixon was never actually impeached, he resigned before he could be, but he was set to be the only president to ever be impeached and removed from office. So, um, but there's a lot of similarities. He won re-election pretty handily, and then they found the smoking gun tape or whatever it was that was kind of the nail in his coffin, and he went ahead and resigned and rode off into the sunset. Um, there's a reason why Pelosi hadn't delivered the articles of impeachment, and I don't be surprised if they impeach him again or add another article to their impeachment, being, abuse of power for assassinating a foreign military leader. So there's a lot of shit at play. There's a lot of crazy stuff that could happen and has happened. I guess for my overall opinion on this thing is, I'm kind of nervous about it. I don't like it's there's a way too many similarities to World War One, the Nixon impeachment, and the invasion of Iraq. The way, like the conservative media has been kind of drumming up this support for war, and yeah, there's just a lot of similarities, and I'm a history nerd, so I pay attention to these things, and it's uncanny, some of the similarities. So I think it's going to be a wild ride. Hope you're ready for it, because it could get ugly. But for the time being, congrats to Trump for taking out this piece of shit. Hopefully it doesn't come to bite you in the ass. I don't know what's going to happen with this vote by the Iraqi parliament. Probably nothing. There was a rocket attack on kind of a forward military base that came from Iran. Looks like they didn't do much anything. They literally sent tens of missiles, is what the article I read said. So they didn't have much. And it sounds like there wasn't any U.S. casualties. But I don't know if there's anybody over there listening. Probably not. But I know there's a lot of you folks that have people that are in the military. I've got family in the military myself, and to all you people out there that may get called up, or if you're over there already, you stay safe. Shit's gonna get crazy, and keep your head on a swivel. But I don't think it's gonna lead to World War III. There's a very real chance it could. I don't see it happening, but the chance is there. A lot of draft concern here lately. I've been sharing those because I think it's funny, and there should, in the very unlikely chance the draft comes back, and an even more unlikely chance I get drafted. I'm a little too old for that, I think. I think I'm right on. I think it's 18 to 25, so I'm older than that. But I've heard anywhere from 18 to 34, and I'm just right on that edge. So I'll be thinking of a bunch of illnesses, so I don't have to go fight in the sandbox. But no, draft ain't happening. I don't think they're stupid enough to bring that back. Militaries that are conscripted typically don't perform very well. And I think there'll be plenty of good old boys ready to saddle up and go fight for Trump, should they need to. So I don't see the draft coming back, but boy, there's a lot of they crashed the Selective Service website searching how to get disqualified from the draft. So that's pretty funny. But I guess it's also kind of a good thing that people are paying attention to this, and I think I think Trump knows that war is not popular right now, and people really don't want to get involved in another one. As much bluster as there is on social media right now, I don't think people really, I really don't think people want another one. So, I don't know what's going to happen from here, but Iran's in a pretty tough spot. The sanctions are hurting them pretty bad, and any of you folks that work around cattle and you know those steers that are just about to die, that's when they get their angriest, and that's when they're most likely going to try to take you out. So don't be surprised by some brutal attacks by Iran in the near future, because they're in a bad way right now. So whether that's a good thing for us or not, I don't know. One thing you also got to think of is the Iranian people that by and large have nothing to do with any of this. It's all the people in charge. Much like here in the U.S., your average everyday person has nothing to do what goes on in the Middle East unless they're in the military, and then you're just doing what you're told over there. So don't lump the Iranian people in with this sorry piece of shit that we killed. They're hurting pretty bad over there with those sanctions. I mean, they have a hard time getting anything in and out, and their economy, it sucks because of it. So I don't know what the Iranian people are going to do, but the Iranian government's in a bad way. So don't be surprised to see them lash out pretty severely here in the near future. But I just want to reiterate, all you guys downrange, or getting ready to go, keep your head on a swivel, and you come home safe. Don't take all your news headlines at face value. I'm gonna try to do my best to keep putting up my revised news headlines on my website. I did a post. Well, it's today's Tuesday, so you can check it out. Go over to burnin-daylight.com, click on the bull session tab, and among the memes you'll also see the semi-fake news, as I'm calling it. And they're just news articles that I found interesting or relevant, and I changed the headline to how I read what was said in that article. So check that out. But yeah, don't believe what you're being told right now. There's a lot of war drums being pounded, and there's a lot of money to be made in war. So there's a lot of these big companies that have a lot of power in our government that would want nothing more than to start making more products and getting ready to pump more oil out of Iran. So you're going to hear a lot of bullshit here in the coming weeks. So keep your head on a swivel and do some research. But I'm going to come back and do kind of a historical overview of what happened between us and Iran, and why it kind of led to where we're at now. I touched on it briefly, but there's a lot of shit that went down, and we are not at fault, or not without blame. There's a lot of blame to go around, and we're a pretty big part of that. So don't be naive enough to think that just Iran is the bad guy. There's a lot of shit that that went wrong on both sides, and there's a lot of blame to go around. So I'm going to kind of go over that. I'm not sure when I'll get it. I've got another book I need to finish listening to, but I'll try to disseminate it and tell you the facts as I know them. So, but that's going to do it for me today. Happy New Year. It's a doozy already. So, go check me out on social media. I'm Matt McKinley on Facebook, at MickerMac85 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow the show page, Burning Daylight, on Facebook and YouTube. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Getting real close to the monetization level there, so try to get that knocked out. We'll be putting out some more funnier content, video stuff wise, in the near future as well. And then I'm at Move Your Ass on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Go follow, share all that good stuff. Help me keep growing this little community we've got. We got some contributors to my website signed on. We'll be posting some of their stuff pretty regularly as well. So check it out, and go join the Burning Daylight Bull Session on Facebook. That is probably, aside from a DM, that's the best way to get a hold of me if you want to actually talk and interact. That Bull Session is a good place to go. So go check that out, and we'll catch you back here next week. So move your ass.